have a wonderful pastor friend who shared his testimony with us several years ago, and his life story is so amazing, and I'd love to cover everything about his story, but for the sake of time, let me tell you today about his black book. And to give you a little background, he had never been in a Protestant church to my knowledge. When he was in his late teens or early 20s, he got his eye on a young girl, who would later become his wife. So to be with this girl, he finally got up his nerve and he went to the church where she attended. Now this wasn't a quiet church like he was accustomed to. This was a lively congregation, and they weren't afraid to lift their hands and lift their voice when they were worshiping the Lord. So during the service, as the presence of the Lord filled that church building, those saints began to shout, they began to rejoice, and it scared the wits out of our friend. It scared him to death. And when the preacher began to lay his hands on different people and to pray with them, that scared him even more. And so our friend, he got up and made a mad dash out to the parking lot to his car. And he said once he locked the door, he reached in his pocket and pulled out his switchblade, and he opened the blade, set it on the dash, and he said his heart was pounding out of his chest. And he thought, if any of those crazy people come out here after me, I'm going to kill them. And he said, I meant it too. He said, I was just so scared about what I just experienced for the first time. Well, by the next time they had service, he couldn't understand why, but he had such a strong urge and a longing to go back. And in that service, he said he made his way to the front and gloriously got saved. He accepted Jesus. And later, as the offering plate was being passed around, he didn't have any money in his pocket. So he reached in and he got out the only thing he had, and that was that trusty old switchblade. He put that in the offering. He said, that was my first contribution to church, was my switchblade. Well, fast forward a few years and he was serving the Lord, doing great in church, but there was still one issue that needed to be fixed in his life. He carried a little black book in his front pocket. And this wasn't a New Testament Bible either. This book, what he would do when someone would offend him, do him wrong, or what he considered to be an offense against him, he would pull out that book and he would write it down. He would write the offense down. As a Christian, he said, I knew that I couldn't take revenge on the situation, but he said, I didn't want to forget about it either. So he would write it down in the black book. One day, he said he was outside burning some trash when he heard the Lord speak to him, and the Lord said, throw the black book in the fire. And this was something he didn't want to hear. And he said, but Lord, I've got to keep track of all the bad things that's been done to me. And he said, God spoke to him again, throw the black book in the fire. He said, but Lord, you're not doing anything about those people. He said, and if I ever backslide, I've got to take revenge. You're not doing anything, so I've got to do something about it. And he heard the Lord ask him, he said, son, did you get saved to backslide? And our friend, he said, he began to weep, and he said, no, Lord. So he said he reached into his pocket, he pulled out that black book, and in an act of obedience and submission, he threw it in the fire. And as I mentioned earlier, this man, he's a pastor now, and he's a tremendous blessing to so many people, and especially our family. But his black book story is such a vivid picture for us today in our own lives. But we read in Philippians chapter 3, where Paul exhorts us in verse 13, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before. And I love verse 14. I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Jesus Christ. So Paul is saying here, this one thing I do. In other words, my one priority is to forget those things which are behind me. In other words, I choose not to remember. Some people will say, well, I can't forget what's been done to me. You may not can forget, but you can choose. You can make the choice not to remember. And I believe what Paul is telling us here in this passage is that we need to throw the black book in the fire. And I felt this very strongly in preparing for this devotion. Can you ask yourself this question right now? Am I 100% effective for the Lord with this thing that I'm holding on to? And we see it many times in our ministry. There's far too many good Christians. They're good people, but they can't move forward in the Lord because they're chained to something in their past. And it's obvious that God's hand is on their life, but they just won't let go of their black book. And if we're willing to let go, if we can get to that place where we finally say, Lord, I want to let this go. Paul gives us the next step towards our victory. We've got to reach or to stretch. We've got to press. And I love that word press. The original word here for press literally means to pursue with all haste and earnest desire. You can't get past your past without an earnest desire to move forward in the Lord. And friends, I believe, actually, I know that God, He's got great things in store for us in 2022. But for us to experience the outpouring of His Spirit, I think it's time we take out our little black book and throw it in the fire. We've held on to these things for way too long. But if we're willing to do this, if we're willing to let it go, then we can. I can promise you this, friend, you can walk forward into victory.